Well, we started an adult Sunday school class, and it's kind of on a theological, spiritual term. And so we've been having people that are usually zealous with Orthodoxy that have started off, not like the rest of us that are kind of cold and stuff. They're still excited. And so it's interesting that some people have found the Orthodox Church, like for instance my daughter, the first time she ever went into Orthodox Church in Boulder, Colorado, she looks at the incense and the vestments and the candles and icons and she said, I'm home. It was just an instant conversion for her. Me, I had to research and study all these books and stuff because I was leaning against the wrong wall. And I tried so many things trying to find God. Even though I was pastoring a Pentecostal church, I kept doing that, and I had to find out, did the Orthodox Church believe in the Bermuda Triangle, for instance? Did I have to start doing things with pyramids and increasing? So I was checking everything out, and it just overwhelmed, the theology overwhelmed mine, and I was so glad to have made that decision and finally do so. I announced to my Pentecostal church, I said I have converted to Orthodoxy. And everybody was looking at me, and except one lady that was sitting way in the back. She grew up Serbian Orthodox, and she goes, "Praise the Lord!" So we did, and soon, those that like to read and pray and things like that, they all became Orthodox, and the other ones that enjoyed the concerts did. So theologically, we all have some need for these things, and so I thought it'd be great. And so we've got a number of converts that are going to be sharing their stories as time goes by, and even some of our Credo Orthodox, which is really special, which as time goes by gets to be less and less in the church. Vera and Tom, Helen maybe, looking around, other Credo. Well, Wasim, of course, growing up in Egypt, he knows, he's done this all of his life too. So it's just a privilege, I think, to have Jeff. Jeff knows how to read, and he studied these things in depth, went through a lot of things, and enjoys the church. So, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you.
It's customary in Orthodoxy, when you get ready to speak or something, you ask for a blessing.
Okay. I have your blessing.
Put your right hand over your left, and then I bless. And you kiss the back of my hand.
My bald spot.
All that hairspray.
Yeah.
God bless you, buddy. Hey, guys.
So I have notes, and we'll use them if we need to. But, when he asked me, he said, "Hey, we're doing a Bible study. Would you talk?" I think Korea mentioned it last day. I missed an email or something. So Wednesday, it's like, "Hey, we're having a talk Bible study." And so I'm from Church Christ, and Church Christ usually, everybody got their Bible, right? So I thought, well, I'll stand up here and I'll say, "Hey, everybody, get your Bible out. We're going to turn so and so." And I thought it'd be kind of funny to watch everybody start looking around. You guys probably don't carry one, do you? This is not a Bible. But do you ever bring one to services? We would never even dream of, in Churches of Christ, of not bringing one to services. So that was one of the differences for me when we started looking at this. And I started talking to Father John and coming over here and visiting. I'm like, it was just a totally different experience. So my name is Jeff Jenkins, and I am a physician in Stillwell, Oklahoma. If you know where that is, it's about an hour away. You go to Siloam Springs and turn south. And I will give you my demographics and timeline a little bit, and then I'll tell you a little bit about some of my stories. I will tell you there are several that I probably don't want to mention, but just superficially, or I will cry, And so if you feel like I'm being superficial on the subject, is probably the purpose. And I'm trying not to make this last forever. So I was born in Alabama, and went to back and forth to Germany about 4 times when my dad was in the military, and would always come back to Oklahoma. He was in the artillery, so we always came back near Lawton. And there was a time or two that he went that we stayed in a little town called Braggs, Oklahoma, which is where my mother was from. And if anybody's familiar with that place, those places are small and they're rural, and it's Bible Belt, and it was a good place. I grew up when I was When I was in Braggs, I was going to a regular church. I was going to a regular Church of Christ. That's the only church I knew. And they have a lot of theology that's fairly consistent with Orthodox theology. And I told Father John when I started coming, I said, I didn't know it, but I was always Orthodox. And I heard several times today when people were getting congratulated on our baptisms and things. I heard several times today, welcome home. And so for me, there definitely was some of that, of Orthodox feeling like home. And so when I was in Germany, we did not have a normal church. We would meet in homes. And my mom and several other people put together little small groups. And they would get together and they would have Bible studies. And I remember every Sunday we would have the Lord's Servant or the Lord's Supper. And it was always grape juice. And it was unleavened bread. It was always a cracker. And never would do the leaven. And we never did wine. For the first time I got wine here, I was like, man, that's some stout stuff. My palate's not adjusted to that. And we certainly didn't mix the bread. That was kind of unique for my wife. She's like, that would just gross me out, having that soggy bread in there. Anyway, when we would meet and we would have, usually it was 3 songs and a prayer. We have another song, and then someone would give a talk or a sermon, and then there would be another prayer, and then there would be the Lord's Supper, and we would have this a couple of prayers during that time, just very quickly pass around the juice and the bread, and then we would have maybe a sermon and a couple songs, and we were done, and it was. It was that way every time. It didn't change, but it was always focused around the sermon. But we always made sure we had the Lord's Supper every month. And that was another thing that was real familiar to me when I got here. It was like, a lot of the local churches I have attended as I've kind of researched and gone looking at places. A lot of the evangelical churches, the Pentecostal churches, a lot of the non-Church of Christ churches, they didn't do Lord's service, their Lord's Supper every month. And that was alien to me. I didn't feel like a church that had that. And so it was one of the fun things about exploring Orthodoxy that was pretty consistent. And the other thing we didn't have is we didn't have any kind of instruments. Instruments were, when I was younger, it was a point of salvation, basically. I mean, it was one of those things, if you attended a church that used instruments, you were not in fellowship with the Lord. And of course, that was when I was young, and as I got older, I participated in several churches of Christ that were much more progressive in their thought, and even made some public statements about that sort of thing. Maybe that's not a point of salvation. And I always appreciated them. There were several great churches that I participated in that I thought were progressive and adaptable, but didn't compromise what I thought were core tenets of faith. Anyway, so when I was young in Germany, and I decided to get baptized. They decided we need to do this in a real church, so we did it in the basement of the military post's chapel. Protestants met in the basement. Lutherans go upstairs. And so I got in the water, got baptized. We did immersion for remission of sins, and the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, pretty consistent with what we do here. And then I remember sneaking upstairs, and I remember going upstairs into the chapel. And in the chapel, it was like the typical, like you would think a Catholic chapel might be. Stained glass, pews. Oh, they had these little kneeling benches. And I remember getting down on these little kneeling benches and thinking, I had this sacred feeling. I had this feeling of awe, And I don't know if I could smell the incense. I don't know if there's pheromones in the wood. I don't know what it was. But there was this feeling that I had never felt before in a religious service. I don't know if anybody's ever had that experience, but I did. And so I can't say I ever really had that experience outside of those circumstances in a church, unless I went into a cathedral, unless I went into, say, in Germany or France or somewhere when we did a little bit of traveling. I would go in those places. I loved going in those places. And there was something ancient and awe-inspiring and something very similar to what I might find in nature, that just made me feel good. And I think maybe that has something to do with why I've sought out Orthodoxy and some other things. But anyway, finally came back to the United States several times, and then we stayed for high school. I have to say the time I spent in Germany meeting in small groups, meeting in people's homes, and just singing faithfully, worshiping faithfully, that was probably one of my, and my mom's probably favorite points in our life as far as our spiritual growth. Something very honest about it. And one of the doctrines of the Churches of Christ is really us trying to recreate the first century church. And so Orthodoxy is kind of the first century church. There was definitely, I think early on, a chaotic period in the early church where we had some Gnostics and we had all the other things, and people were probably meeting at home, people on the run, and apostles going here and there. But the Churches of Christ were a restoration movement by Jones and Campbell and several others. It happened, I can't remember the dates, but it was like 1800s. What do you say, Father? Do you recall?
Yeah.
Yeah, so 1800s, and a lot of it happened in Europe. A lot of it happened in the United States, and it was kind of a reformation of a reformation. And you go into a Church of Christ now, usually there might be a cross. Usually there's not even a cross. Certainly not a crucifix. There's no icons. The walls are bare. There are seats, usually not pews, sometimes pews. And there's no incense or any of that stuff. It's pretty bare. But I would say being in people's homes felt honest. And it sounded like something first century Christians would be doing when they were running from Romans and all that stuff. When I came back to the United States, I came back to a little town, southwest Oklahoma, and went to high school there. Made great friends, had a wonderful church there, good, honest people that nurtured me. I had great elders. I had great friends. I had some guys that, Wade, I drank too much, and we did things maybe in a youth group you wouldn't think you're supposed to do, but probably happens all over the place. And it was safe, and it was a nice place to explore. And I would say it was my home away from home. It was nice, a good experience. And I remember my senior year, everybody was talking about, where are you going to go to college? I didn't have the attachment. I was going to college, and several of my friends were going to Oklahoma Christian. It's in Edmond, Oklahoma. It's a college. It's a Church of Christ college. And I wasn't attached to going to a Church of Christ college. I had a scholarship for $200 to go to Cameron University to play the oboe. And I think the only reason that they wanted to give, or that they agreed to give me the scholarship was my friend who was in the youth group could play the clarinet. Boy could play the clarinet. And he told him, he said, I'm not going unless you give him a scholarship. And so anyway, I got a $200 scholarship. I didn't go. I wound up going to Oklahoma Christian. But before I went, the men in the group, my dad had passed away. Big important thing. Good man. Passed away of cancer very quickly at 16. And so Dad, these men had taken on a role of fatherhood. And they decided they were going to take me to Montana with a bunch of boys from the boys' home. And we were going to go up there and have a summer camp, and I was going to help. And dude, Montana's beautiful. Montana is the best cathedral on earth. Hagia Sophia, I don't think can compare. and don't anybody hurt me. But it was beautiful. And we went twice. We fished for trout with primitive stuff, and we rode mules, and we had a bunch of wild boys up there, and we had a great time. And I experienced a moment in nature I don't think I've ever had, and it was very similar to these cathedral moments I'd had. And from there, I decided I was studying biology. I was studying body. Buddy, I got into Oklahoma Christian, and I was like, I was going to be Charles Darwin, right? Well, can't study evolution very well at a conservative Christian college. But that's where I wanted to go, right? I mean, I wanted to be a research scientist and that sort of thing, and I met some great professors, a couple of them I thought were the most liberal men I've ever met. They were willing to talk to me about abortion. They were willing to talk to me about, back then it would have been Antifa, or something, they were willing to talk about these social things and violence and all that sort of stuff, and all kind of on the side. But they knew this is what I want to talk about. I became pretty liberal. George W. Bush Jr. came and I was the only heckler. I had long hair. I had earrings. He was coming to speak at the church, at the bastion of republicanism and conservatism in Oklahoma City. And I can remember heckling J.C. Watts and all these guys. It was pretty cool. I'm not that conservative anymore, or that liberal anymore, but it was a good time. And I explored lots of things. I remember being so frustrated with the Christian evidences that the missionary was speaking about in the Bible classes I had to attend. And I remember going to these men and going to my elders at my church. There was one or two that were kind of safe I could have these discussions with. He was an old veterinarian. And he said, Jeff, you're not ever going to have all the answers. They're not ever going to quite all fit. He said, I'm a vet. You and I have had the same kind of classes, or have the same kind of classes. And he said, I got to say, I think evolution makes sense. For us, it's the field theory of things. He said, but not everybody needs to know that we believe that sort of thing. And he said, and I'm like, why do you attend? Why do you even attend if, they've got this, everybody's, he's like, I love these people. They're my family. And they edify me and I edify them. And he said, it's not a salvational thing, whether we believe in evolution or not, that sort of stuff. He said, maybe my God's bigger than that. And so I remember having that saying in my head, my God's kind of bigger than a lot of these thoughts, And it's always come back to me when I get into maybe a hard spot or something. That my God's bigger than that. He's above and beyond it. So went through in college. I met a beautiful young lady. Her name was Melinda. And Melinda was a diehard Church of Christ girl, and much more conservative than I was, and I caused her all sorts of misery, much like my current wife has been caused misery by me coming to Orthodoxy. She will say, oh, you have an altar. Yes. Or more icons. Yes. I ordered some icons, but I got a good deal. I texted her yesterday and I said, honey, I was having trouble lighting my incense burner out behind the clinic on the stairs. And one of our nurses who used to be, he's a hippie. I know he's done a lot of pot and he's very experienced in lighting bulbs. I just know it. And he's walking across the parking lot, and the smoke's coming out, and but it's not. And I'm struggling to get the little charcoal thing lit, and I got this bag of incense crystals, and I'm like, I am back. I feel like back in an alley. I'm lighting up meth or something. And he comes walking over, and I'm like, I'm having trouble. I try to explain to him what's going on. And he is just cracking up. He's like, no problems. And he shows me how to light it. So I text her, and she's like, please don't smoke meth behind the clinic. You know? And so she endures that. And honestly, my poor young wife, she's not the same place I am, right? And that's okay. But my first wife wasn't quite the same place I was. So, and that's okay too. So when I was in college, I met this young lady, I asked her to marry me, and she said, that's yes, but you can't support me being a botanist. That's how I tell the story. It's not really true, but that's how I tell the story. You can't support me being a botanist. Have you thought about going to medical school? I'm not going to live in a cabin in the woods, and you'd be gone for months at a time doing your research, and me trying to raise kids in a log cabin in the Sierras or something. And I said, well, maybe Charles Darwin. He got some training in medical school. A lot of these guys who went to medical school were great naturalists. That's how we explored science. Bulgakov. Anyway, you're with the Bride and Lamb. I've been trying to read that. Holy snot, that's hard to read. He's a Russian guy, and he said we come to our faith in different ways. He said, but typically 3 phases. One is studied ethics. The next is nature, and the next is church. That's a common experience. So I started on this journey in nature and science and that sort of stuff, coming that second phase. And so I thought that was okay. I could do that. So I wanted to go into medical school, made applications. And actually, my wife, soon-to-be wife, my fiance at that point, a small Christian school, she changed my advisor, she changed my major, she changed my enrollment, all that stuff. All you had to do is say we were engaged, and she had control everything. You know. Again, that's my story. I'm sure my memory's clouded in some way. So started focusing on medical school, got into medical school. Medical school was awesome. I know there's plenty of stuff I'm forgetting. And I learned tons, right? Challenged in so many ways. And the only thing I've got about Orthodox I can think of in there was I was having this discussion about how church maybe wasn't fulfilling anymore. I was at the Church of Christ, and they were so conservative, and I wasn't having my needs met, right? I'm thinking maybe it was just the skepticism that I think is a normal part of young people going to school and kind of leaving their parents' religion and maybe getting ready for some time in the wilderness. I don't know. But I remember having this discussion. He said, yeah, we've been going through the same thing. He said, we're going to join the Orthodox Church. And I didn't have any experience in the Orthodox Church. I come to find out, I lived right across the street from the Greek Orthodox Church. And I never, we were renting an apartment. I never even thought that I could even go in there. You know, all I knew was they put on Oktoberfest, but as far as I knew, they had locks, and, you know, they were Jewish. Now I've met Coptics, I've met Russians, all sorts of stuff. It's awesome. But back then I had no idea. And it just kind of went in one ear and out the other. But I remember respecting this man and his journey and thinking that was just planted. And I left, we left medical school, and it was horrible and wonderful, as you might imagine. I had professors and we were going to medical school to tell us about how this is a lot like going to Vietnam and all that stuff. I bet I slept more than the guys in Vietnam did, or slept less than the guys in Vietnam did, but I wouldn't wish that on anybody. I finally decided I was going to do a specialty in family practice and psychiatry. I was going to do both. So I did 2 residencies at the same time. I moved from Oklahoma City, I moved to Tulsa. I took my nice young wife, and she was pregnant, gave me a little boy a few years later, a little girl, and was not a very good husband. Not because I was a bad person or had affairs or anything, I just worked too much. I remember having to make a rule that said I won't sit down till she sits down. Because she would walk by me huffing, having that basket full of laundry, and I'm like, I haven't slept in 36 hours. I'm going to sit in this recliner, and I'm going to. That woman had not slept very much either. She had newborn babies, and she was exhausted. And it doesn't matter how entitled I thought I might have been at that moment. It wound up being a pretty good rule for me. I don't sit down and she sits down, and she wouldn't. I didn't know I ever made that rule, and I did a very poor job of living up to that rule, but I remember making it. After our second kid, we're still going to church, still not, for me, just not meeting my needs. I'm reading early church fathers, and I'm reading Gnosticism, and I'm reading all sorts of stuff, right? I'm reading James, the brother of Jesus, some got his doctoral treatise, that, just challenging everything. And and then she passed away. I came home suddenly toward the end of my 5 years of residency training. She had just passed out. She had a clot, and we didn't know about it. She had a genetic disorder in their family, and she had taken a long car ride, and she was taking birth control pills. She had a DVT, deep vein thrombosis, and passed out at home. This is one of those places I'll cry if I go any further with that, so I'm not going to tell you about all that drama. But she gave me a ton of wonderful experience with her, and her faith was grounded, literal. We went to church every Sunday. It probably wouldn't have hadn't been for her, right? And I learned great ethics in the Church of Christ. I learned great practice. I met beautiful people. But that pretty much ended my relationship with the Church of Christ on an official level. Her in-laws are beautiful people. Her in-laws, her parents, her whole family, gorgeous people, faithful people, Church of Christ people. And when I went to their church, that's where I would experience these wonderful Bible studies by people who professors in religious studies and comparative religions and sociology and all this other stuff at their church. And they would I would see her parents struggling with big concepts, reading about lives of Paul and N.T. Wright and all these other people, just, exploring things and challenging things. And they were developing to be the driving force of change in this church. And I saw their church go through some ups and downs, but I saw some beautiful growth. It was wonderful. To this day, I relish going to their church. I think it's just beautiful. But even there, in their services, I'm like, they do all the new songs. I don't know the song. You can sit the whole time and don't have to sing. The sermon is real long. And the Lord's Supper is just not real. It was meaningful to me then, right? Now that I've come and I've experienced this, I go back and I'm like, I missed out on something today. Not taking that away from the church. I'm telling you, the Church of Christ for me has been wonderful, and I never want to disrespect that. But I kind of, from this perspective, get an idea of what things got thrown out in the Reformation. That maybe were good, and in the Restoration they got thrown out as maybe good. And so when I left the church kind of formally and moved to Stillwell, got real busy, didn't have much time. Had I married a new young lady about 2 years into that. I married a young lady. She's the one who came here, covered head to toe in tattoos. She wasn't when I married her. Man, it's beautiful. Somebody on Ancient Faith Radio this morning was making fun of one of the priests who kept saying how gorgeous his wife was, and maybe how inappropriate that was. My wife is beautiful, and she's funny and all the other things, and she's been. But we were nuns, right? I mean, you guys have heard of this new term, nuns, which means we're not affiliated. We're Christian people who are somewhat disaffected. We weren't being spiritually satisfied, maybe, and so we're unattending, right? That is the largest denomination of Christians out there right now, right? Unaffiliated, unattending, intermittently attending, and they're on their own journey, right? And these guys aren't sitting still. they're reading all sorts of stuff, right? They believe in God. They believe in spiritual stuff. They're doing yoga. They're doing a bunch of New Age stuff. They're heading to maybe some evangelical churches. They're going from church to church. They're studying philosophy. They're smart people. These guys are sharp. So they're struggling. They haven't found the church yet. And who was it? It was M. Scott Peck. You remember Scott Peck? He wrote The Road Less Traveled. Anybody ever read him? He was a psychiatrist, so I kind of like him. And he was an atheist, and he wound up becoming a Christian. And he became Episcopal. And he said people go through a couple of phases. They go through 4 stages of spiritual growth. And when you're little, it's all chaotic, and then you wind up getting this faith in your parents, right? You become this second phase. The second level is black and white. It's the rules. It's a lot of people never get out of that, right? We just follow our faith in our parents. We're just going to stay there. We don't challenge it. And but then he said there's a third phase. He said typically people would leave the church, but if they didn't, they wound up being kind of aloof from the church, and they were studying science, and they were studying alternative religions, and they were basically challenging what they'd been taught. And then if they lived long enough and they stayed searching, they typically get that fourth phase. That fourth phase would be somewhat mystic, right? My God's bigger than that level 2 God, right? That my God now he's in everything. He's this pantheism thing, and you find him in nature. And Bulgakov, you say you find him in nature, and then which was science back, for them, and you'd wind up bringing that then back into the church. And these were like my elders who would say, maybe you don't have to follow all the rules. Maybe you don't have to keep all the fasts. Maybe it's not so much about the rules, maybe it's more about you and your relationship with God, things like that. So I was headed that way, but it took me 15 years, right? 15 years I'm away from the church, and I'm a nun, and my wife's a nun, and I'm looking, and I get into nature big time. My wife sees me reading some books about a tracker that I'm all excited about. She, for our wedding anniversary, or wedding gift, she gives me a $1,000 certificate to go to his school. And I had no idea he had a school. And I wind up traveling to New Jersey. I spend time in Botswana, do all this other stuff. The next over 10 years, I'm teaching nature observation and tracking. I'm doing primitive skills. I am living this connected nature in the wilderness. Anybody ever been to Botswana? Cutest, most beautiful people, the San Bushmen. I was in the Big Butt Clan. I went up there, told them stories about my wife and about how muscular she was and about her butt. And we were sitting there talking, when we were talking around the fire. And there, here they are in their loincloths and their little stick and all this other stuff. All the time telling stories around the fire about my wife. I have to. I can't help it. And sometimes she's wearing flannels. Sometimes she has nice beards and whatever. But we're talking about her muscular physique. She's a personal trainer. And they are just dumbfounded. They're like, there's so little to eat here. And we're so thin. But we have to take herbs to get our ladies, to get them a good size rear end. And that's how we got our name, the Big Butt Clan. And so I'm sitting here with them. They're like, you must be a great hunter. I must be. They thought I was the most wonderful hunter because I could give my wife a big rear end. And it was But one of the things I found in the Botswana people is, for one, they're monotheistic, right? They're monotheistic. But when you first come to the little Bushmen, you say, hey, what do you believe about God? Where they whip out this cross, it's a Catholic cross, they show it to you, and they say, with one hand, I'm a Christian. On the other hand, where's the money? The ministers, right, these guys have nothing. They live in no man's land. The government doesn't take care of them. They don't have wells. It rains once a year. It's an awesome place. It's a real Eden in some ways, and it's miserable in others. And these guys are pulling products from nothing. And but the missionaries had given them food. And so when you ask them, they're like, we're Christians. And many of them are Christians, and many really do have great faith. But when you ask them, what's the faith of your fathers? What's your real faith? It's monotheistic. In some ways, very evangelical. They have a trance dance that they do at night. They dance for hours, and they will lay hands on each other, and they will call it passing Om. Om is love, it's ropes. And it's a very mystic, involved, beautiful religion that has so much in common. It's a basic faith. They're like, it's part of who we are. We can't separate ourselves from these beliefs. And it's a 100,000-year-old culture that has this belief that is outside Christianity with so many similarities, which is beautiful. Those were one of my mystic times, and another time in nature. So finally, a few years ago, I'm really getting back. I've never left reading. I've never left looking into Christianity. It was my culture. I could never be a Bushman. I looked into Buddhism. I spent a lot of time doing Zen. I was Taoist studied Taoism like crazy. I was engaged in martial arts this whole time, and studying Nietzsche and all these other things. But ultimately, I was like, no, I got this itch. I need Christianity. I need a relationship with Jesus, and I need a relationship with the Holy Spirit. And I started looking, and I went around to lots of places. And I went to the Episcopal Church across the street. It took me an hour to get here. And very open, accepting people. I really enjoyed them. And some of the great people I respected were Episcopal. I went there. And I went to Disciples of Christ, which was in the split off Church of Christ. They were related in this restoration. I went to Church of Christ again. I came here. I went to Catholic Church. I went to some evangelical Pentecostal churches. I got to see the Holy Spirit in a way I'd never seen it before. And in the last 10 years, I've had a couple of mentors. I have to say my starettes. Have you ever heard of starettes? Starettes are these elders that come into your life that people, if they're blessed, they have a real starette that they have a relationship with, And they probably don't know their starettes, but anyway. And so all of mine have come in pieces. I had Callistus Ware, he's like, most people don't get to have starettes. But they don't get given starettes probably because they didn't. If they had someone just spoon feeding them that wisdom, it probably wouldn't have done them any good. It's like in medical school, if you want to teach somebody something, you show it to them and you make them do it. It's very Socratic, you see one, do one, teach one. That's how you do things. Same thing in learning primitive skills. And for a starette, maybe it's the same thing. So I have a doctor who I'm with many days. I spend lots of mornings with him. And he is on this journey. He's come through the 12-step thing, and he's been in recovery for a long time, and humble, beautiful. And we would sit around and have these talks in the morning about the stuff that I've been doing for 10 years. He says I flitted around like a hummingbird, going from little thing to little thing. And all the time I'm coming back to Christianity, but I'm like, what does it have in common with this? What does it have in common with that? Where did I go this weekend? What was it like? What was my mystical experience? What was, whatever. And we would process these. And I had some others. And I talked to him about the churches, and I went to his evangelical church, and I got to see these guys having the most wonderful emotional experience. And I say it's emotional because it is. And I can see the value of that in a young church, a church that needs converts who needs passion. I can see why God would maybe give the gift of all these chrisms, to a young, growing church, a church that needs evangelism. maybe a church that's under persecution or something. I remember, I think I was talking to Father John one time about how there's a history in the Orthodox Church of spiritual gifts maybe being in a new frontier or something. There might be a uptick in kind of spiritual gifts in that kind of vein. And then as a church matures, a lot of times those tend to kind of mellow out. And I can see the value in that. I see the wisdom in that. So anyway, to conclusion, I mean, I guess when I look at Orthodoxy, I'm like, I'm not taking anything away from my church practice experience. I think it's beautiful, but it wasn't quite fulfilling for me. And I remember I'm this little boy sitting in this cathedral, standing in this cathedral with the incenses and the icons that speak to me subconsciously. Right, of all these images, I could sit here and I wouldn't, Father John wouldn't have to say anything. And I would leave having had all of these icons, all of these relationships, all these heroes, these saints, they would all speak to me. And I go home and I study, and I'll read, and I'll come back. And I have a different relationship, maybe with John or St. Nicholas or something like that, because I've read about them. And then I get almost a sermon out of it. I don't even have to hear Father John do. I hear what you say. But anyway, I'm Orthodox, I guess, really because it fulfills my Church of Christ longings for the first century church. And I've kind of gone through the whole wilderness thing. I'm sure I can keep going back. I got another privileged skills class I'm teaching in a couple of weeks. And but it's big enough, right? It's bigger than my God in a lot of ways. I think, at least at the moment, it's got a place for mysticism. It's a place for ritual. It's got a place for my big questions, all this theosis stuff and pantheism and all these other things. All that stuff is a nun that I had. I didn't have a place to hang. Now I got it. Make sense? So, anyway, I appreciate you guys letting me talk. I appreciate you inviting me into your church. I appreciate the people who stood with me and helped me and followed John all the times. It's been awesome. I look forward to hearing everybody else's stories. That's pretty cool. I'm sorry if it was long. I have no idea how long that went.
There might be a question in somebody.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody have a question that they'd like to ask Jeff? Okay. Thank you for coming to church today. Thank you for sharing. Opening up your heart to us. Very good, old boy. Thanks. Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for the Orthodox Church that you brought us all together and that we all have some things to learn and some things to grow with and a closeness with you. Thank you so much for the idea of church. Bless us, we pray.